Hi folks, Canadian Prepper here. Welcome back to the Daily Dose of Doom and Gloom. We're living in the age of consequences, my friends. It's only going to get worse, and your time to prepare for it all is limited. We need to talk about a former NATO chief suggesting that they are about to put troops on the ground in Ukraine and give Ukraine security guarantees, which will likely mean a worldwide radiological disaster for us all. We have Evgeny Prigozhin in an expositional interview revealing that he thinks Putin is about to authorize a nuclear strike on Russia's border regions. You heard correct. We have apocalyptic wildfires raging. What you're seeing behind me is the New York skyline right now. The entire East Coast, all the way from Quebec, all the way down to Florida, in some places, is completely engulfed and saturated in toxic plumes of smoke. And in the next 48 hours, Toronto is about to be hit by a plume of smoke so thick and toxic that you're going to want to make sure you close your windows, you lock your doors. You're going to want to keep this smoke out. If you have an air purifier, they're all being sold out at Home Depot and everywhere else. You can't find air purifiers. You want to bring your pets inside. It's going to get ugly. And here's the harsh reality, guys. Barely a fraction of 1% of the Great Canadian Boreal Forest has burned. You have not seen the historical fire yet. I've been warning people about these fires for years. And there's always some dumbass in the comment section minimizing it, saying that this will pass or that this is normal. This is not normal. It's very abnormal. These are uncharted territories for our species, and it's only going to get worse, monumentally worse. So you need to prepare. You need to have a contingency plan, an evacuation plan. You need to have fire breaks if you live in a wooded region, and you need to have the gear if you do need to bug out in a forest fire. You don't want to just rely on your vehicle's air filtration system. There's things that you can do to prepare yourself for fire. It's a very, very real threat that we're all going to be faced with. And this smoke as well. If you have respiratory issues, this is going to be a problem. This will reduce life expectancy for a lot of people if this becomes more commonplace. Here in the West, we deal with this pretty much every summer, but only in recent years has it become so frequent. And I believe that the amount of smoke days has exponentially grown in just the past 10 years. And now you guys in the East are getting a little taste of this. So let's talk about everything we got to talk about today. First, let's check out the photometer, shall we? What is the photometer reading today? SHTF photometer, fear, uncertainty, and doubt-o-meter. Current level is at 80 out of 100. We have a long way to fall. Now, this is a conservative estimate. I could easily put this at 99 due to the situation in Ukraine. A few days ago, it was at 75. That was before the dam was blown and before Quebec lit on fire. Excuse me. We're going to talk about the reasons why Quebec is on fire. There's a lot of misinformation right now on the internet. Excuse me. Now, where should we start here today? This is just an overview of what we're going to talk about. Fires, people, self-imposed smoke lockdowns might become the new normal. We have a NATO chief, Rasmussen, I believe, talking about why NATO is going to have to issue security guarantees and put troops on the ground to prevent escalation, he claims. We have Evgeny Prigozhin in an incredibly expositional interview predicting numerous things, including mutiny, not against Putin, but against the Russian military, the Ministry of Defense, I should say. We have Lavrov issuing warnings about F-16s, because we were talking about this for weeks, that F-16s can be used as a delivery system for nuclear weapons, issuing threats about those F-16s. There are rumors, and that's all it is at this point, that the main counteroffensive has begun. When it comes to analyzing the Ukraine-Russia situation, there's usually two camps. One, people are suggesting that the Russians are winning and the Ukrainians are losing, and the other side claims the opposite. There's seldom any in between. I'm here to tell you that we simply don't know what's going on. It appears as though, based on the most up-to-date Telegram information, that the Ukrainian main thrust of their counteroffensive has in fact begun, and that some of the Russian defensive lines are in fact being breached in the Zaporozhye region. The unprecedented dam situation is the absolute worst case scenario. Of all of the worst projections for the Kakhovka Dam being blown up, we've seen that due to high water levels. So it's a total disaster, and I'm still not entirely convinced with respect to who did it, although I do, the evidence in cui bono leans towards the Ukrainians having the most motive for it. I'm not saying that that's what all of the evidence suggests. The Russians are saying one thing, Ukraine is saying the other. In terms of who benefits from such a thing, I've already made my case that I think Ukraine stands to benefit a little bit more than the Russians for a variety of reasons that I'm not going to get into again because I don't feel like arguing in the comment section today. We have a top U.S. admiral in the Pacific, this is the top guy now, saying that Biden has asked him to have a contingency plan, and he has guaranteed Biden that they can get this, beat China in a war, okay? We couldn't beat Afghanistan. We couldn't even really keep Iraq in check, much less Syria. So to think that we're going to defeat the Chinese is 100% delusional, especially from warships. It's not going to happen unless it goes nuclear, and the way these guys are panicking in their boots, guys, I'm very concerned that they're not nearly as smart as we think, and that they're stupid enough to start a nuclear war. I actually believe now that they are dumb enough, the powers that be, to start a nuclear war. I don't know if anybody is at the helm of the ship. I think everybody is just relying and standing on the shoulders of their forefathers' achievements and just this democratic system of law and order that we have, but it appears as though it's falling apart. There are threats to other dams, and the Russians are saying that Ukraine may have released more water from an upstream dam, because recall, there are actually 6 dams on the Dnieper River, I do believe, and Ukraine controls 5 of these dams. If they want, they can release more water. There's videos claiming to show that Ukraine is releasing more water in Dnipro GAS, in the Zaporozhye region. Now, the counter-argument to this is that this is something that they normally have to do in order to prevent flooding on their end, okay? So it's very hard to understand, but what this is doing, of course, is exacerbating the problem. And right now, the worst-case projections for the dam collapse are currently unfolding. So this right here is pretty much accurate at this point in time. Now, where should we start here today? Let's just see what we got on our maps. Did I show you guys the smoke map yet? So this is let's start with the smoke stuff, all right? Now this is this toxic plume. So this is firesmoke.ca. Now if we start playing this, you can see this dark red. This is over 25 times what's considered healthy. That plume is about to go across Toronto, and that's going to happen tomorrow morning when you start your morning commute in Toronto. Looks like Buffalo, Cleveland, Pittsburgh, Philadelphia. Those places are going to be toxic cesspools. You don't want to be breathing that stuff in. In fact, they may have to just shut down some cities because, again, this smoke can actually become more toxic as it goes away from the epicenter of the fire, so I'm told, because it gets concentrated in the air. Now, fortunately, there is some rain in the forecast, but with rain comes lightning strikes. Now, a lot of people are posting disinformation on Twitter. Okay, you see how right now there's lots of red in there. The red means more thicker smoke, right? Smoke typically is when a fire is somewhat suppressed. So depending on the time of day and depending on the temperature, there might be more smoke, there might be less smoke. So forest fires are just like lungs. They kind of breathe a bit. They'll rage for a while and then they'll kind of die down. They'll rage and they'll die down with the wind. And that's exactly what happens. So a lot of people are making clips of this because you see it rages, it releases these massive toxic plumes, and then the time of day, it goes into the middle of the night, things cool down a bit. The sun isn't blaring. and then it slows down and now it's speeding up again, right? It's more thick, toxic smoke is being emitted. So it goes in these cycles, and people are clipping this and they're saying that, oh, look, they all were started with space lasers by the government at night because they want to charge us more carbon taxes. Look, guys, we all know that the government is incompetent, and they're incompetent. They're not smart enough to do those sorts of things. You can have a situation where we are, in fact, having this kind of detrimental effect on our habitat, and we're also trying to be exploited on the other end. Those two things can coexist. It's simple. You can have ecological catastrophe, human-induced, and the lying, thieving government at the same time trying to get you on the way out. These two things can coexist, so stop acting as if one thing must be a total, complete, utter fabrication just because we have corrupt governments trying to exploit these catastrophes. Now, these wildfires are only going to get worse. I've been saying it for years. I've made countless amounts of videos. This looks bad, but this isn't even but a fraction of the actual boreal forest that could and will eventually burn down. So you need to have a contingency plan. Some of the gear, people always ask me, what sort of things do I need in order to protect myself from this smoke? Well, you need a good air filtration system in your home, changing out your air filters, having backup air filters. I'm sure a lot of those are sold out of Home Depot. If you have some sort of air purification system, that will help as well. Because of course, a lot of people might think that wearing a gas mask outside is overkill. And in some ways, I would say, sure, unless you have respiratory issues. If you have someone who has respiratory issues and they're maybe elderly and for whatever reason they need to be outside, which I'm assuming that they probably don't, but let's just say they do. You have to transport them or whatever. They're going to want a gas mask with a P3 filter and a PAPR to do the breathing for them. You want a PAPR, it's a powered air purifier respirator, I believe. And you want one of those because that's going to do the breathing for the person. So the average person, you can get away. You're not going to die if you're even in the thick of this, but it's not going to be good for you. And if you have any sort of respiratory issues, it's going to exacerbate those. It's going to make them worse. So a P3 filter is simply a HEPA filter. Okay, this is going to block 100% of any fine particle. Smoke is a particle. Now, oftentimes companies will recommend, because fires can also release different types of chemicals, different types of things get burned. It's not just a clean smoke. Typically, it could be, other things that are being caught up in the conflagration. You're going to want activated carbon, which is derived from charcoal. Okay, you can actually make it. We've done videos on how to make it. But a filter like this is a Dot Pro filter. It has a HEPA filter, so it has this, but it also has a layer of activated charcoal, which is going to adsorb any toxins that are in the air. Not all, but most. Enough that you're not going to die from a gas attack or something like that. This is basically the filter that will do it all. In fact, the filter that does it all, we don't have anymore. Those were made in Russia. They had activated charcoal, they had a HEPA filter, and they had this molecular component in it that inactivated carbon monoxide. So you wouldn't die of carbon monoxide, okay? Now, we do actually have, and that's very unlikely that you're going to be in that situation where carbon monoxide is going to be a threat unless you're in a very congested area where there is absolutely no oxygen, okay? Like in a building that's on fire or something like that. So I would recommend, just for somebody who is vulnerable, a gas mask has a multitude of uses for preparedness. A P3 filter will be sufficient in most cases, but if you're concerned about some of the toxins that might be released in, industrial fires or whatever the case, then you could get yourself an activated charcoal filter. There's also activated filters that have longer shelf lives. This one is a 20-year filter. It's vacuum sealed. And the reason why they vacuum seal them is because if you have a filter, like this one is not vacuum sealed, but it's still sealed. The vacuum seal plus the proprietary blend in this one, which is why they're twice the price, they last up to 20 years, is going to ensure that it doesn't adsorb any toxins and thus clog up the filter. You're going to know when a gas mask filter is no longer good. It's just going to stop working. You're not going to be able to respirate as well because it's going to come clogged. It doesn't absorb, it adsorbs, AD as opposed to AB. Absorbing is like a sponge absorbs water. Adsorb is when the toxins in the air, the heavy metals and things of that nature are actually magnetized to the activated charcoal, and you don't breathe it in, and it can't pass through the HEPA filter, those molecules, okay? So that's why you would want something like that. A more cost-effective solution without having to break the bank is a simple fire mask. Every single person, if you work in a high-rise building, if you are living in the country in a wildfire-prone region, you don't know if you have to evacuate. You see all these videos of people driving down the back roads and it's on fire on both sides. You don't know if your car's vehicle air filtration system is going to be able to effectively filter out all that smoke. Maybe your tires are going to melt. You just never know what's going to happen, and you're going to be stranded there on the middle of the road, and you might have to walk out. Now, if that's the case, and I mean, hopefully, you're able to walk out, a fire mask is a good throwaway tool. This is a $40, $50 solution. It will protect against carbon monoxide as well. And it protects against, this is for fire, mostly for smoke, but anything that filters out smoke will also filter out most viruses and bacteria as well. But, just something, they don't advertise it for that reason, but, use a bit of common sense. You're not a prepper if you don't have a fire extinguisher. I mean, that should go without saying, right? If you live on a homestead, you got to take fire security seriously, because someday the forest that you're in can and will burn down, even if it's a rainforest, even if it's like a temperate region. In Victoria and Vancouver a couple of years ago, it was so dry there that the locals hadn't seen it that dry in their lifetime. And this is a rainforest. This is a part which is notorious for rain. And a couple of years ago, there was no rain. There was record high temperatures. Everything was on the brink. Vancouver Island almost burned down. It could have burned down. If you could just throw a match and that place would have went up in smoke. So just because you live in a region where there's lots of precipitation now, the way things are going, the way things are changing, I wouldn't be surprised that everything gets turned on its head. Lots of different fire suppression tools. You can find them all at CanadianPreparedness.com. A fire blanket is something which will not only protect you against some of the heat, but it will also inhibit a fire from spreading. So these are all things that you should consider. Now that we've talked about that, let's move on to everybody's favorite and most hated topic at the same time, World War III. So, where are we going here? Evgeny Prigozhin gives an interview, all right? Very, very expositional, revealing interview. And I don't know what this guy's plan is, but I can tell at this point that he's for real and that he's saying what he thinks, that this is not an act. Nobody's this good of an actor. Now, here are some of the bullet points of what he's saying. He has said that Ukraine has broken through the defenses on multiple fronts. Now, the only part I can see right now where they're breaking through is in and around this region here. And I'm not even going to begin to pretend I'm one of these map guys who is this knowledgeable of the technicals as to what's going on the ground. But the bulk of the fighting, I believe, is happening in and around the Zaporozhye direction where we expected it to happen, towards Mariupol and Melitopol and that sort of thing. And they're also apparently taking back territory in Bakhmut. But by and large, for such a long-anticipated counteroffensive, like this part here, they're taking some parts to the north and south of Bakhmut, but nothing really substantial. And of course, they're still on the border near Belgorod, making claims that they are pushing into Russia proper. Now, Wagner has said, and I don't know how much I believe this, but this is what he says. He thinks that what they might do, he thinks that the Russians are scared to nuke Ukraine, okay? But he thinks what they're trying to do is bait the Ukrainians into Russia proper in the Belgorod region. And I'll just show you where that is on the map, because I know everybody's not geographically savvy. So in and around here somewhere, where the Ukrainians are making some moderate gains, that they're going to detonate a nuclear weapon within their territory in an attempt to pump the brakes on this incursion of Polish mercenaries, Russian self-proclaimed NIZIs, Russian and of course Nazi Azov-affiliated brigades. And they are saying that that's what they're going to do. They're going to utilize some sort of nuclear weapon. That's what he's saying. This is what they might do. This is the guy who said he suggested that they should have used a nuke at the beginning of this war. They should have used it immediately, because now I can't remember what the reason or the explanation is for why they can't use it now, but either nobody's going to take it seriously, it's going to look like an act of desperation, or there was some other rationale. You can go and watch the entire interview. It's all translated online. But he's saying that the Russian Ministry of Defense is lying. Now, I did find it incredibly suspicious when the governor of Belgorod came out and said that the city of Novokakhovka, where the dam was blown on the left bank of the Dnieper River, when he came out and said that everything is fine, people are, just going out their business as usual, and the entire town is flooded, I did find that just a little bit odd. So this is why you got to be very careful and understand that there are two very polarized camps. People who are very pro-Russian and people who are very pro-Ukrainian. And the more the West exaggerates, lies, blames everything on the Russians, the more polarized they become, because the less inclined they are to believe anything the West says when it makes these outrageous claims. I mean, here's a list of some of the outrageous claims that have been made. You can believe what you want, but this is what they want us to believe. The Russians blew up their own $20 billion Nord Stream pipeline. The Russian drone, in a false flag, attacked the Kremlin. Russian drones from either partisans or a Russian false flag once again swarmed Moscow. Russia was shelling its own nuclear plant. It blew up the dam that it controlled and needed for a variety of reasons. And I think what's going to come next is Russia nuked itself. But according to Evgeny Prigozhin, there may be some truth to that one. So it will be interesting to see exactly how this whole thing plays out. Let's hope it plays out in the most peaceful way possible. The more damning things that he said was that he believes that the Russian top brass, that the arrest, and this is one of the most provocative things he said, which I think is going to get him in a lot of trouble. And this is where we might see some real deal civil unrest rise. I do still think that Putin has control over this guy. I do think if Putin wanted him gone, he would be gone. But I do think that him and Putin, as I've talked about before, is Putin just trying to triangulate his generals, keep them fighting with one another to maintain control? It could be. Running an autocracy in the way that it's shaped in Russia is difficult. But he's saying that not only will they be arrested, but they'll probably be killed. So in any other country, that would be considered an incredibly treasonous statement to make, especially by somebody who has control over tens of thousands of troops. To say that we are going to hang or we are going to seek the death penalty for the top brass in the military of the country I'm supposed to be representing, that's very, very treasonous. And I have a suspicion that this situation between Wagner and the Russian MOD is going to heat up. And he is calling for a large-scale mobilization. He thinks that they should have already mobilized over 1 million troops. He's upset that it hasn't happened. He thinks that people are going to revolt against Shoigu and Gerasimov. He thinks that they're 2 months away from firing squads for Russian generals. That's a very bold statement. And this is what he says, which was quite telling. As soon as we lose 1 meter of territory, 1 meter of Russian territory, which they, by some accounts, they already have, everyone will get a taste for Russian meat, he says. The Romanians, the Poles, everyone. And for this, he references the Polish Volunteer Corps, who have been documented as fighting inside Russia. Polish troops and American vehicles inside Russia. Truth is stranger than fiction. Now, on the topic of NATO wanting to send troops into Ukraine, the former NATO chief, Anders Rasmussen, says a group of NATO countries may be willing to put troops on the ground in Ukraine if member states, including the US, do not provide tangible security guarantees to Kiev at the alliance's summit in Vilnius. That's coming up in July. That's part of the reason why they're moving Patriot systems and why the Russians got all this stuff in Belarus, the nukes, the S-400s, the whole 9 yards. He also warned that even if a group of states did provide Ukraine with security guarantees, others would not allow the issue of Ukraine's future NATO membership to be kept off the agenda. He says that we know that Poland is very engaged in providing concrete assistance to Ukraine, and I wouldn't exclude the possibility that Poland would engage even stronger in this context on a national basis and be followed by the Baltic states, whose population is so small, it's rather insignificant in the grand scheme of things. The entire Baltic states have a population that is half that of Moscow, just the city. So, something to think about. I think the Poles would seriously consider going in and assembling a coalition of the willing if Ukraine doesn't get anything from Vilnius. The Poles seem to be incredibly scared about Russia. I don't know enough about the history to know if there's justification for that, but that's what they're saying. Now, there's something else I forgot about what Wagner said. He said, we give the ministry 2 weeks. This is his ultimatum to the Russian military now. It's about to get interesting, guys. We give the ministry 2 weeks to liberate our territories in the Belgorod region, but if they fail or we aren't confident, I will demand that we are allowed to go there, because otherwise they'll keep lying to the Russian people. So he's saying that they're going to go there and deal with the situation. It should be known that a lot of the Russian top brass, with the exception of Surovikin, haven't had any real military experience. General Surovikin, General Armageddon, you can tell just by looking at the guy, he's been around. In fact, I don't know what it is. Maybe you just lose your hair, but both him and Prigozhin, and maybe that's why I'm losing my hair, both have been on the not the front lines of combat, but have orchestrated these large-scale combined arms conflicts before. If that does not happen and the situation continues to worsen, we will go to Belgorod. And this is what he says. It's probably the most provocative thing this guy has ever said. And it's not far from Belgorod Oblast to Roblevoka, an elite suburb of Moscow, to the something embankment that I can't pronounce, the location of the Russian Defense Ministry headquarters. What if we go there to demand more ammunition? So he's making very explicit threats against the lives of Russian generals. And that's why I think we're going to see him being reined in by Putin soon. Apparently, Putin has already tried to rein him in. There is a conflict between the private and government contractors there. Now, as for the Ukraine counteroffensive, this is a counteroffensive that some people are estimating includes up to 30,000 troops. There have been mixed reports, and I'm not even going to begin to go into, I don't really have all the maps up, but there's mixed reports that the Russians have been holding the line and have been crushing Ukrainian forces for the last few days. These so-called probing operations, the upper estimates are thousands of dead Ukrainian soldiers and dozens of destroyed vehicles. Now they're saying that they have 150 tanks and 30,000 troops currently moving in and around somewhere in here, and I can't show you the footage. You can just go and you can find the footage yourself. As we speak, the war is going pretty insane, and it's always changing. This is some shots. I believe this is the Brooklyn Bridge here. Sort of be skipping all around here, but I want to make sure I touch all the bases. Do I want to talk about that? So this is the interview with Prigozhin. Okay. Russian state-sponsored media has made a threat. And Kiev could be flooded out. There's a dam that basically protects the city of Kiev, and this is a very unstrategic arrangement that they have here. This is the dam which is holding back. Okay, you see this dam? That's the dam. This is one of the biggest cities in Ukraine, Kiev. A lot of developments along the river. Okay, so this dam is holding back this massive body of water. So they're concerned that the Russians may try to blow this dam. Now, as far as I know, dams are pretty fortified. Some people estimate that you need to blow it up from under the water, or you need a tactical nuclear weapon in order to take this out. But there are threats that there might be more attacks on these dams in the future, and there's a lot of them. They go all the way up the river. Now, there's been other accusations that this dam right here in Zaporozhye, that they are actually releasing water from this dam to make the problem worse downstream. And this is a claim by the Russians that the Ukrainians are releasing this water from the dam in order to make the problem in and around the left bank of the Dnieper River worse. Now, the Ukrainians have pushed back and said this is pretty typical with what you would do this time of year, because of course they have to release this water, because if they don't, then it's going to be backed up on the other side of the dam, and then you could have flooding on their side. But you would think that maybe not a good time to be opening the taps at a time like this. You would want to try to contain or reroute that water somewhere else. Obviously easier said than done, but to minimize flooding, it seems that that's only going to make the problem worse. But again, this is just video on Twitter. This I found fairly interesting. In Moscow, in Leningradsky Prospect, they noticed an ice cube with a frozen red button inside. Next to the ice cube is a sign with the inscription, "Patience of Russia," and the cube is melting. So this is the piece of art, and this is the button, obviously the nuclear button, and the ice is melting. And I suppose it's a metaphor for a lot of things right now, if you know anything about the Arctic sea ice. So it's not looking good, guys. It's not looking good. This is an interactive map tool that I seen on Jimmy Dore. And these are all the American military bases. These are all the American military bases all around the world. So, you know, you're Russia or you're China. You're China. I mean, look at China. Does it look like China is the one who's imperialist here? Really? You can say all you want about the Chinese. You don't like Mao. You don't like communism. That's fine. But looking at this map, it takes a lot of mental gymnastics to come to the conclusion that China is the one with imperialist ambitions, and we aren't. These are all American military bases. Now again, what I know about the world and what I know about life is that I still think that democracy is a terrible system, but it's the best one we got. Tyranny of the majority and blah, blah, blah. But you have to wonder, if we didn't rule the world, these dominoes could quickly fall. And I think unless you have total control, you don't have any control. That's what the perspective of our hegemons is, and the US as the global arbiter of commerce and the enforcers of the seaways. And they view it as, if they give China or Russia an inch, then that's the end. It's just a cascading effect of the waning US military superiority over all of these territories. And they're probably right to some extent. So as much as I don't buy into the lies of the American government, I almost wish they would just come out and say, look, we don't trust you to run the world. That's why we want to run the world. If they were just upfront and open about it like that, then, you know, but it's when they lie about it. And I'm not saying I would go for it if they were, you know, hey, we want to be in charge of the New World Order. That's the funny thing about the New World Order. We already have a New World Order, and it's the US dollar system. But New World Order that they want, if you're a Joel Skousen listener, we've interviewed him on the channel before, is the one that comes after World War III. It's the one that they can only bring us under if they have one more world war. And here we go with they. And I hate going into they because it's a dead end, never-ending downward spiral of a rabbit hole, and you're just going to waste a lot of time. That's why just keep prepping, keep gardening, keep making sure that you got all your boxes checked for when the shizzy hits the fizzy. What else we got to talk about here? So the Russians are basically saying that, Kiev blew up the thing they went in there at nighttime and they put some bombs in the water on the dam or something like that. That's what Shoigu is trying to say. And Zelensky is appealing to the world on blowing up the Kakhovka Dam. We need the world's maximum reaction to Russian terror. This really isn't working out the way they thought. You can tell that the world isn't buying it. John Kirby's being questioned about it. I'm actually impressed with some of the questions that reporters have been asking at these White House press conferences. You can see that, and I feel bad. I feel bad because this is the point in the story where a lot of Ukrainians realize that, this is why all those people were hanging off the plane in Afghanistan, because we're about to be abandoned. We're about to be abandoned by the U.S. military. And the question is, why does the U.S. government care so much? Why do they care so much? Why do we have to have that much of a buffer zone with Russia? Why couldn't we have just left Ukraine alone, left it in a neutral state, honored the Minsk agreements? Why couldn't we have done that? What were we really afraid of? Do they know something that we don't? And they might know something that we don't about Russia's true ambitions. Okay, they may. I don't know, though, because I've long since reasoned that the reason why they want to contain the Russians right up to Ukraine is because they are worried about this massive amount of debt that they have tied to the US dollar system, the global reserve currency system, and that the only way they can maintain maximal control is typically with constant expansion and imperialism, because if you're growing your debt, you have to be growing something else at the same time. You either have to be growing your population, you have to be growing your territory, and if they're not doing that, in the very least, they need to hold territory. When they start to have a contraction or a recession in an imperialist sense, where they're losing territory and the other side starts gaining, that's the beginning of the end. So maybe there's something else to this, and that's why $100 billion in military aid is a small drop in the bucket when you're talking about a $100 trillion monetary system. But it doesn't look good, guys. Things just keep on escalating. The photometer is at 8 out of 10. And this is what Prigozhin said exactly. I'm afraid they might harbor some foul thoughts about dropping a little nuke on their own territory. Could it be the reason why we are ceding territory in Belgorod? Because we are too scared to hit the territory, but not our own, Prigozhin said in a video interview with the Donbass Today Telegram channel. And that's interesting because they haven't really been moving a lot of troops in this direction. The Belgorod governor has requested weapons. They won't give them weapons. Do they fear an uprising of their own people? Who knows? It is very, very possible. This is what the top admiral in the U.S. We are ready to fight a war with China and win. What I can tell you is the Secretary and President have tasked me with 2 missions. The first is to prevent this conflict, and the second one is, if I fail at mission 1, to be ready and prepared to fight and win. The United States military is manned, trained, probably, maybe, equipped, postured, and ready to execute both of these missions. Indo-Pakam, Chief said. Okay, let's see how that goes. I have a feeling it's not going to go well. Didn't go well in Korea, didn't go well in Vietnam, and it's probably not going to go well in the biggest country in the world in terms of population and economy. GDP nominal, that is. Russian Condor FKA space radar satellite. This may be why they're hitting all the targets and all of the top brass of the Ukrainian military haven't been seen in a long time. Is it because the Russians are just getting better at finding their targets? And now these guys are very concerned that they're losing, or that the Russians could hit them with more precision strikes. So this new satellite apparently can see through clouds. It can see with a very, very high resolution, and it goes over Ukraine twice a day. You would think that they had this capability before, but apparently they didn't. Now they're able to identify everything that's going on the ground in Ukraine. They're already using stratospheric balloons for this purpose, and I'm actually surprised that those aren't being employed more readily right now, because they very well could. And we're going to be talking to fellow YouTuber Green Greggs about that next week, and I hope to pick his brain a little bit about how those balloons might be being employed in this conflict, as well as upcoming conflicts, because he used to actually work on the balloons. He was one of the pioneers in that field, so that's going to be interesting. But apparently the capabilities of this satellite may be game-changing, and that's why we might not be hearing from a lot of the top Ukrainian leaders, or they're just actually concerned that the war is lost and they're just trying to make themselves more scarce. That's a possibility as well. We have a drought happening in the Midwest. Surprisingly, California no longer in drought because of all the flooding that had happened, but this is going to affect food prices. U.S. corn crop deteriorates after Midwest hit by worst drought in decades. So you could see it's very close to the Corn Belt, and this is where all the corn is growing here. And so 30% of the corn production is within the area that's experiencing drought. Toronto, stay indoors. That's the new method of lockdown. And they were grounding flights at LaGuardia Airport. So the shizzy's just hitting the fizzy all over the whizzy. You guys take care. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe. Canadian Prepper out, and check out CanadianPreparedness.com. All of these fire prevention tools that I talked about, you get 10% off. Use discount code Survival Prepper, and you can support Canadian business, North American business, and we try to keep our people employed through these tough times. Thanks for watching, guys. Take care. Canadian Prepper out.